Hey, if I could ask you a question and have you answer, this would be one of the questions that I would love to hear answers. We won't spend too much time on this. Answers to. Who here likes being told what to do? Yeah. Okay. Some people. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. No, but probably if I would push you a little bit more, it would mean what? You like clear expectations, right? Would that be part of it? Maybe just simply. Okay. I think it's safe to say. With my wife sitting here, I am not one of the ones who likes being told what to do. And I'm not going to ask her for feedback on it. She can share that feedback when she preaches. That's fine, a long time from now. I don't like being told what to do. It is a hang-up that I've got, and I think probably many of us wouldn't really like being told exactly what to do all of the time. And maybe if I could put it like this, how many of you like rules? Okay, yeah, I'm seeing a few of the same hands. Like following rules. How many of you like breaking rules? All right, there's a few more coming up. Okay, listen. There was a study done. We've talked a little bit about this in the past, but I think it's worth revisiting. There was a study done that looked at fences in playgrounds. Okay, fences are around, how they were used around playgrounds. And what this study found is that in playgrounds where there were fences that enclosed the area, the kids who were playing in that playground, on the structures in that area, ventured all over in that fenced-in area. And so they explored. And they played in one section and ran to another and would play there and would kind of run the perimeter of the fence, and they would feel very free moving inside of this fenced-in area. The other side of the study showed that kids who played in playgrounds where there were no fences stayed really close to the center and like close to their parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, like whoever brought them. Like they weren't really sure like where to go. Like, am I allowed over here? Am I allowed over there? How far afield can I run? My kids came home from the Arboretum yesterday, and Hannah's first thing that she said to me was, "Dad, I had so much fun. Me and my friend, we ran away from our parents." Gone. The Arboretum's huge. But they didn't. Like kids, when there was no fences, they wouldn't venture as far, and maybe didn't feel as safe, or weren't quite as certain where they could go. They weren't as free. We're starting in Matthew 5, we're starting into the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount. And I think one of the hang-ups maybe that people have, and you might be on side on this or off side, like you might agree or disagree. One of the hang-ups that I think people have around religion is it is simply a set of rules, and it's going to tell me what to do, and I'm not going to enjoy my life, and I'm not going to live as free, and it's going to keep me over here in a small box, and I'm not going to be able to live a full and fulfilled and fulfilling life. Like you're just going to tell me all the things I can't do. And so like at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, at the beginning of this, we're going to spend like weeks inside of the teaching of Jesus. One of the things that I want to challenge you to think and to pray through and to wrestle with is not this set of rules that is simply here that exists for the sake of following a set of rules, and maybe even to challenge you to shift our thinking. That's what I want to do, to shift our thinking on Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount as the best way to be human and to flourish and to live into this fullness and freedom in life the way you've been created to live. The Sermon on the Mount, it's the most popular, it's probably the most well-known teaching of Jesus. It's interesting to me, John Stott says, it's the best known part of the teaching of Jesus, though certainly the least obeyed. And so no matter where you land, like young or old, new to church, ancient, don't take offense at that, sorry. Like, I think we all struggle with this. Nobody loves maybe some people love being told exactly what to do all of the time, and it gives a consistency to life for sure. I think a lot of us struggle with that, not being told exactly what to do. I think that Jesus says this. He says, "I have come so that you may have life and have it to the full." And I think that the Sermon on the Mount is Jesus' best teaching as to how to live into that fullness of life. What does it mean to be human? I like to call it the Sermon on the Mount is a collection of Jesus' best teachings on how to be human, how to live this life that we've been created to live. And so we're going to jump in the very first part of chapter 5 says this. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them. So Jesus sees crowds, he goes up on a mountainside. None of this would have surprised anybody. This was a typical way of teaching. He went up, he sits down, his disciples, they come and they sit with him, and Jesus begins to teach. In the book of Exodus, about 3 months after the Israelites are led out of slavery in Egypt, and God is kind of moving them through the wilderness, God invites their leader, Moses, up a mountain. And it's to come up a mountain to have a talk. Right? He says, listen, Moses, we need to talk. God had already appeared to Moses at this point in the story in a burning bush and called him to go and to lead God's people. And so a mountaintop conversation, like this wasn't out of the ordinary. This wasn't like a surprise. It wasn't a shock maybe to Moses. In this conversation, though, he goes up and he meets with God. In this conversation, God laid down what we have and what we call the 10 Commandments. And not only the 10 Commandments, but a new law would be given to Moses and to the people of Israel. And God essentially says this to them. He says, listen, in being my people and in living the life you've been created to live, this is how you are going to flourish. This is how you are going to live. This is how you are going to be the people who I have called you to be. And in the words in Exodus, it says, you yourselves have seen what I did in Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself like I brought you out. Now, if you obey me and fulfill my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. That's the promise to them. For about 40 days, Moses is wrapped up in this conversation at the top of a mountain with God, this conversation with God. Finally, he returns, and he brings down the stone tablets containing the law, right? And what happens? He finds that in the 40 days, people have gotten distracted, and they've forgotten, and they've maybe lost faith and trust. Like, Moses is gone. Like, maybe that was it. Like, maybe we'll never see him again. And so what do? They're like, well, we need a way to worship, and we need a God to give thanks to. And like, somebody brought us out. And so they start making these idols and worshiping idols, and they carve out images of God. And Moses is furious, and he smashes the tablets, and he has to climb back up the mountain a couple more times and receive the law and the commandments again. And eventually the story culminates. He's got to like chisel out the 10 Commandments again in a new set of stones. And it's a lot longer of a process. But the laws that God gave are interesting. They're kind of like these 3 categories. Laws about justice and mercy. So things that sound like this: do not oppress a foreigner. You yourselves know how it feels, because you yourselves were foreigners. Laws that govern business and production. Right? So God says, listen, for 6 years, you're to sow on your fields, you harvest the crops, like grow and do everything, work the land. And then he says, but during the 7th year, let the land lie unplowed and unseeded. Then the poor among you may get food from it, and the wild animals may eat what's left. Do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves. Like, I don't know if anybody in here has olive groves, but it's an interesting way to think about the way we work and the way we are called to produce. There's this Sabbath sort of law, ritual, habit worked right into it. Laws regarding proper worship and the Sabbath specifically for people. He says, you are to observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so that you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. And so from the time of Moses and the giving of this law, like all the way up until the time of Jesus, everything in between, like these sets of laws, this understanding formed the basis of how to be human, of how to live. If you were part of this community, like this was the way you led a blessed life. Moses goes up and he returns with commands from God. And now Jesus goes up the mountain, only instead of descending with commands, instead of himself coming down and just dictating the way things will now be, he invites his followers up with him. He invites the crowds up with him. He invites the people to come and to sit, and again to learn now a new way to be human? What is the way to a blessed life? Like, what does it mean to live inside of the kingdom of God? Jesus has just announced the kingdom of God is here. The kingdom of God is unfolding in front of you. Now he's going to say, this is what it looks like. This is how you live into it. And he begins in the oddest way possible. He says, blessed are, we'll continue reading in verse 3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. I read that and I go, that's a strange way to start a sermon. It's a strange way to begin the teaching about life inside the kingdom of God. Like so if you were to hear that, but I think that the next question that I have is like, okay, well, who wants in? Who wants in? Who wants to willingly go into this list of realities many of us feel in seasons of life, like poor in spirit, mourn, those who are meek, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and those who show mercy. It's a strange way in. I think one of the things that becomes tempting maybe is to read this as simply a new set of commandments. A new way to view the Ten Commandments, or just even a new addition to, okay, so now what more do we need to do, right? Like we did just read the story of Moses going up and receiving the Ten Commandments. Before you run out and try to figure out how to keep these new commandments, I think it's important for us to understand a few things that are so crucial. Jesus is going to say in his teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, in just actually a few verses, do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So what he is not saying is this is a new set of 10 commandments, and you can like just pitch the old out, like the 10 commandments can be gone, and then here's the new list of requirements. Here's the new things that you need to do. So in the same way it said, do not murder, now it says, okay, go and mourn. Like that's not what Jesus is doing. He's not saying this is a new commandment in the same way as the 10 commandments. I think we make a fundamental error in reading the Bible and in understanding the story of Jesus if we separate his life and his teaching from the Old Testament, from the law and the prophets. Jesus himself says, listen, I have come to fulfill them. I've come to fill them up. I've come to execute them, right? To do the very thing that you have been called to do. To invite you into a new way of living because of what he is able to accomplish, a higher standard. Not in an attempt to earn or to live up to this standard of the law, but out of the reality and the thanksgiving and the grace and the love that Christ has, that Jesus has fulfilled the law. Because the Sermon on the Mount, what are we going to see? The Sermon on the Mount is going to call you to an uncomfortable standard of living. It is. It is going to seem hard, and it will challenge you. The Sermon on the Mount is going to touch all areas of your life, your ethics and morals, the way you make decisions, the way you think of what is right and what is wrong, how you spend your money, what you do day after day. All of it, in some way, is going to be hit in this sermon. In very real, personal ways. He's going to say, like we said, hey, you have heard it said, do not murder. And I don't need to see any hands, but I'm guessing not many of us need to struggle with following that commandment. Do not murder. But Jesus is going to go on to say, I say to you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. So if I were to ask you about murder, which I'm not going to do, I'm assuming not many hands, hopefully. If I were to ask you when the last time you were angry was, it was probably today. Like, that's the reality of life. So we've moved from something that maybe very few of us struggle with, maybe very few of us need to wrestle with day in and day out, to Jesus saying, no, actually, listen, this is something that changes, that affects, that touches every single person. I know, absolutely, for sure. Every single one of you have wrestled with a moment of anger in your life at one point or another. Listen, I'm not giving away any secrets here, but maybe it's when you're leaving the Lincoln Alexander Parkway and trying to get onto the 403 and you can't figure out which way is west. But that's just me. So you see what he's doing? He's taking the law and he's fulfilling it. And then he's saying, out of that fulfilled place, here is the new life that you are called into. And it's not to forget all of these things. It's not to throw all of these things out. It's not to just kind of punt them away. It's to realize that here is the spirit of all of it. Here is the spirit of the command. And here's the spirit of what is going to allow you to live into life. Thank God it's not a list of requirements that you or I need to meet in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Because I don't know about you, but I'd fail. My guess is that you'd fail too. It's an invitation to a better way of living out of the life that Jesus offers and gives. And it's a description of what it will look like to live inside the kingdom of heaven, what it will be like. Stanley Hauerwas writes, the sermon, therefore, he says, the sermon is not a list of requirements, but rather a description of the life of a people gathered by and around Jesus. To be saved is to be so gathered. Jesus goes up the mountain and he gathers people around him. And then he unfolds this new way of living. And we believe that the Spirit still gathers the church. And Jesus still gathers you to him and says, here is the best way to be human. Here is life in the way that it was designed to be lived. To be saved is to be so gathered. I think it's important to see that unlike Moses, maybe even in a new way to Moses, Jesus goes up the mountain to give his teaching, and he invites you along with him. Hauerwas continues that this is why the Beatitudes are the interpretive key to the whole sermon. So all of what's going to come in chapters 5 and 6, all of Jesus' teaching on anger and worry and storing up for yourselves and all of it, he says all of it we need to understand through the lens of these Beatitudes. He says they're the interpretive key to the whole sermon, precisely because they are not recommendations. No one is asked to go out and try to be poor in spirit, or to mourn, or to be meek. What he says is, this is the way it will be. Don't be surprised when you see it. Don't be surprised when you live through it and move through it and experience it yourself. It's not about trying to list and achieve all of these things, but equally don't be surprised that this is the way the kingdom functions. So I'm not sending you out. I'm not sending you out in some like self-deprecating way to become poor or to become meek or to look for reasons to mourn. Like, that's not it. But what I think we are saying and what we need to read in this text is that we ought not be surprised when we do see members of our community who are meek and who are mourning and who are poor. And for us to understand that from the very beginning, the kingdom of God has always been this upside down kingdom. Because here's the reality that I think you and I experience, right? You read this list and you know that, right? So blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. All right, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. What do we know about mourning? Not every single person who mourns is comforted, right? It's not like this truth that exists beyond, all time and space that always happens. Like, those who mourn, some are comforted and others are not. What do you know about business? So do the meek inherit the earth all the time? No, like the meek don't always inherit the earth. The meek aren't the ones necessarily rising up the ladder of success at the business that you yourself are working through or that you yourself own. You know that. It's not this sort of universal truth. What Jesus is saying is that the world that you live in and the world that you experience, we know that these things don't always happen. The kingdom of God was meant to be like this. Jesus is saying, my economy is going to be different. My economy needs to be different. It needs to be one in which where those who mourn are comforted, and where the meek do inherit, and where those do hunger and thirst for righteousness, and where you are merciful and you are pure in heart, and where you do become a peacemaker. When the Israelites received the law from God through Moses at Mount Sinai, it was for a very specific reason. And in order to see that reason and fully understand it, I think we need to actually back up all the way to Genesis 22. Where God promises this to Abraham. He says, and through your offspring, all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me. And so the connection is like the law exists, not because God is some like egotistical maniac who liked to make other people obey a set of rules just simply because like it's God doesn't need this to be. It's not like, anyways, right? It's not just out of a control over people. There's a very specific promise here. It's that so that the world will be blessed. If you obey what I've commanded you. The law existed to bless the world. Always did. And when Jesus brings up the mountain his followers, it's for the same reason. It's to go out and bless the world. I think it's important for us to see the reason why Jesus lays all this out. It's so that the world will be blessed. These lines like blessed are you, they're not, I don't think this like spiritual state of blessing or like receiving exactly, like spoken into exactly your life, some good thought or feeling, some positive outcome because of the way that you're living. I think we misunderstand what Matthew means here by blessed. And so some Bibles, and maybe I don't know the one that you're reading, some will say blessed are you. Some will actually say happy are you. Happy, which I think, maybe works, maybe doesn't. Like, happy are you who mourn? It's maybe even a harder sell. Some translations, I've heard some people talk about being blessed as it's actually like a state of congratulations. Like, congratulations for you, to you who mourn, because this is the way it works in the kingdom. You will be comforted. I think Jesus is saying this. You have a place in the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is for you and has something for you and for you to share. You are valued here. You can find blessing here. You can find fulfillment, even life to the full. It's interesting to me that when Jesus speaks to the little children, the parents of the little children and the disciples who have stopped these kids from coming to Jesus, like, hey, he's too busy teaching the adults, so you can't come in here, right? He says something very similar. He says, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Are you poor and poor in spirit? Do you mourn? Are you meek? Do you long for righteousness? Do you show mercy or need mercy? Are you pure in heart? Are you attempting to be a peacemaker to the best of your ability? Are you persecuted or insulted because of your faith? I think Jesus says, you have a place at the table. The kingdom of heaven belongs to you. There is something for you here. And guess what? The kingdom of heaven is also for your neighbor and for your enemy, for the one you hate, for the one who won't forgive you or who you won't forgive, for your family, for your friends, for your coworkers. It's for the world. Jesus moves seamlessly, and we have this tendency of breaking up the sermon into really like bite-sized, digestible pieces, and don't worry, like we are going to end today. There will be an end. We're not going to move through the entire sermon, but he moves seamlessly from the Beatitudes. He says, blessed are you when, into his teaching on salt and light. He says, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. And what does he say? A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. It's going to be visible everywhere, right? Neither do people light a lamp and then put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a lampstand, on a stand. It gives light to everything. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Right on the heels of saying, listen, it's probably the fact that people are going to persecute you, and it's probably the fact that people are going to speak injustice and hatred against you because of me. Guess what? That's not a reason. It's not an excuse to go and hide and for this to become a public or rather a private thing that you do just inside of your home or inside of your mind or inside of yourself. It is meant to be lived in a public way. Why? Because all of these things that we see about how blessing works and how the kingdom of heaven works is not just about you who I'm calling, it's about everybody. And it's for the world. My kingdom doesn't look like this world. You are going to have trouble. You are going to struggle. You are going to stand out. And guess what? That's okay. You're meant to. I think the desired outcome is crystal clear. It's not about achieving for yourself some level of spiritual blessing. It's about living a life that blesses others. How does the way that you show up to work on Monday morning bless others? Hate your job, don't get along with your coworkers. How are you going to bless them this week? And that's not just like a rhetorical question. I actually want you to answer it, not here, but maybe to somebody, to a friend or to a spouse, a partner, tell somebody, listen, I'm going to choose to bless people this week, and this is how. Parents, how are you going to bless your kids this week? When they drive you absolutely out of your mind, or when you're driving them to the 30-second thing that week, event that they've got going on, right? Kids, how much you bless your parents, no matter how young or old you might be. Grandparents, call your grandma. She wants to hear from you. If you need to shop, how are you going to make purchases in a way that work for and toward justice? And then don't add in some way to a constant consumption, cycles of harm, consuming fast goods. I think Jesus' desire in this section of Matthew, probably in the entire gospel, but certainly in the Sermon on the Mount, is to take you from somebody who observes from the peripheral, even on the outside looking in, to somebody who is deeply invested and involved. From crowd, like we began with, to follower, to disciple. So we're going to end where we began, verse 1. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and sat down. And his disciples came to him, his followers came to him, and he began to teach them. Jesus saw the crowds, and some people say, all right, Jesus saw the crowds, and so he was avoiding them. He was avoiding the crowds, so he went up. No, he goes up to a place that is known. It's common for rabbis to sit and teach. Jesus saw the crowds, and I think he invites them to come and to follow and to learn a new way to be human. And that's still his invitation today. That each one of us would learn to make every single decision set before you with a view to how it will bless others, how it will live into the kingdom, and how it will glorify God.